Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Rideau Cottage. But you don't need to be alarmed. We're here because I need to be in lockdown, not because you necessarily need to be. Aujourd'hui, je veux vous parler de notre plan pour ajuster nos mesures aux frontières de manière sécuritaire et de ce qu'on continue de faire pour soutenir et protéger les gens partout au pays. Commençons d'abord avec les frontières. Yesterday, we shared the first phase of our plan to safely ease our border measures for Canadians who are fully vaccinated. To be considered fully vaccinated for travel, you must have received a full series of a vaccine or a combination of two vaccines at least 14 days before entering the country, and the vaccines you got must be approved in Canada. As of July 5th, Canadian travelers who have submitted proof of full vaccination will no longer have to quarantine at a hotel or at home. They also won't have to take a day 8 test, but they will still need to complete mandatory testing both pre-arrival and once in the country. Let me be clear. This is the first step of what will be a gradual, careful plan to safely reopen to travel. The pandemic is not over. There's still variants circulating around the world, so there's a number of important measures that need to stay in place for now. À partir du 5 juillet, les voyageurs canadiens entièrement vaccinés n'auront pas à faire de quarantaine et à repasser un test au jour 8, mais ils devront toujours recevoir un test négatif avant leur départ pour le Canada et à leur arrivée. Pour les voyageurs qui sont partiellement vaccinés, les mesures présentement en place ne changent pas. Et les restrictions de voyage pour les gens des autres pays sont toujours en vigueur. Je sais que beaucoup de gens ont hâte de voyager, mais la réouverture doit se faire en bonne et due forme et de façon prudente. De plus en plus de Canadiens sont entièrement vaccinés et les choses tranquillement vont devenir plus normales. One of the reasons we can start easing our border measures is because more and more Canadians are vaccinated every day. Over 75% of eligible Canadians have now received at least one shot, and over 21% are fully vaccinated. We will have received a total of more than 50 million doses by the end of June, and a total of over 68 million doses by the end of July. En parlant de vaccins, j'aimerais souligner une autre bonne nouvelle qui a été annoncée par le ministre Champagne ce matin. La construction du nouveau centre de production de produits biologiques à Montréal est maintenant terminée plus tôt que prévu. C'est une étape importante pour rebâtir nos capacités de production de vaccins ici au Canada, que ce soit pour produire des doses contre la COVID-19 selon les besoins dans les prochaines années ou pour faire face à tout autre virus. On s'assure d'être mieux préparés pour l'avenir. Pendant qu'on travaille fort pour protéger les Canadiens maintenant et pour l'avenir, on poursuit aussi nos efforts pour rebâtir un Canada plus juste pour tous, notamment pour les personnes en situation de handicap. On sait que les gens vivant avec un handicap ont plus de chances de se retrouver sous le seuil de la pauvreté. Et la pandémie a rendu la situation
the poverty line. The pandemic has made the situation even tougher for them. Many people have lost their jobs. If you are a person with a disability and you're experiencing financial difficulties, know that we are continuing to act
this morning,
to better serve you.
Minister Qualtrough took an important step forward in creating a new Canada Disability Benefit. This benefit would supplement, not replace, existing supports. The goal is to lift hundreds of thousands of people living with a disability out of poverty. Yesterday marked the second anniversary of our government's groundbreaking Accessible Canada Act. And today, we're moving forward to deliver on the first ever Disability Inclusion Action Plan. This plan will reduce poverty, help more people with disabilities get quality jobs, and make sure everyone can access federal programs and services. Of course, provinces and territories play a lead role in providing supports and services to Canadians with disabilities, which is why we're going to be continuing to work with them as premiers. I want to thank Carla for all her outstanding work and leadership on this important file. Together, we will continue to make sure that no one gets left behind as we rebuild from this pandemic. Building a better Canada also means building a safer Canada. Safe from COVID-19, but also safe from gun violence. Today, Minister Blair will announce additional common-sense measures that will help fight gun violence in Canada. As of July 7th, when someone applies for a firearms license, the background check will cover their whole life instead of just the past 5 years. We also strengthened oversight of how firearms are transported, something the Conservative Party all but eliminated. Other regulations tabled in Parliament yesterday make it a legal requirement for retailers to properly verify a buyer's license before making a sale and to retain inventory and sales records for all firearms, including non-restricted ones. This is the best practice already for most reputable retailers, and it'll help investigators trace firearms used in crimes. These new measures are just one part of our plan to protect communities and Canadians. Last year, we banned assault weapons. We're also fighting the illegal gun market by giving more tools to police and border officers, and we continue to fund gang prevention programs with a focus on community-led initiatives. In the last few days alone, we've seen heartbreaking gun violence in some of our cities. No child should be caught in the crossfire. No community should be torn apart by tragedy. It has to stop. En 2019, par exemple, les armes à feu ont été utilisées dans 40% des meurtres au Canada. On sait que la présence d'armes à feu à la maison peut augmenter le risque de féminicide et de suicide. Les nouvelles mesures qu'on propose cette semaine, notamment d'étendre les vérifications d'antécédents sur toute une vie, plutôt que juste les 5 dernières années, vont contribuer à sauver des vies. Et pour notre gouvernement, votre sécurité, c'est ce qui nous importe le plus. Avant de terminer, j'aimerais parler de la session parlementaire qui se termine cette semaine. On a d'importants projets de loi à faire adopter. Le Parti conservateur fait tout pour empêcher ces dossiers d'avancer depuis des mois. Hier, malgré l'opposition des conservateurs, la Chambre a finalement adopté le projet de loi pour soutenir nos artistes et exiger aux géants du Web de payer leur juste part. Mais il en reste à faire pour protéger l'environnement, pour défendre les communautés LGBTQ2 en bannissant la thérapie de conversion et pour soutenir les familles et les PME. Ce ne sont peut-être pas des priorités pour le Parti conservateur, mais ce sont des priorités pour les Canadiens. C'est pourquoi on espère que le Bloc et le NPD vont tenir tête à un autour et travailler avec nous pour faire avancer ces dossiers progressistes. There are only 2 days left in this parliamentary session to pass legislation that Canadians need. The Conservative Party is still doing everything they can to block this very important work of defending LGBTQ2 communities by banning conversion therapy, of supporting workers by extending the wage subsidy through the budget, and of course, reaching net zero emissions by 2050. These are progressive bills that will make a real difference in the lives of Canadians. So I hope that parties that call themselves progressive, like the Bloc and the NDP, will work with us today and tomorrow on passing these measures for Canadians. Thank you. I'm now very happy to be taking your questions in person and on the phone.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone. We'll start question period with the phone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. You may press star 1 if you have a question. Vous pouvez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. La première question de Raymond Fillon, TVA. La parole est à vous.
Raymond Fillon from TVA. Good day, thank you, Prime Minister. I'd like to get back to the border issues. When can we expect the border to be open again to tourists and visitors? I understand you want to do things gradually and carefully, but can you give us an idea of when Canadians will be able to travel to the U.S. and Americans come here for travel purposes and tourism? So at this point, Canadians will be able to travel fully if they're fully vaccinated vaccinated. We know more and more Canadians will be in that position as the days go on. But we do know that we need to have increased protection within Canada in the sense that we need more people fully vaccinated to make sure that we don't import the disease by bringing, even by Canadians that could be bringing the COVID-19 back into the country. We're doing things gradually, but we're talking about weeks and not months anymore. The fact that so many people are getting vaccinated in Canada is great news. We are heading, actually, the planet in a way with respect to the rhythm of our vaccination rollout and the percentage of Canadians vaccinated. This is excellent news, and we certainly hope, as I've said, we certainly hope that we will have more good news about reopenings in the coming weeks. But of course, it depends on the vaccination rate, the COVID situation in general, the variant situation, and what's happening elsewhere in the world. But we're following this closely, of course, because everyone wants to get back to a more normal summer.
I understand the impatience people have to get traveling again, but keeping Canadians safe has been and will continue to be our #1 priority throughout. With the measures announced tomorrow, fully vaccinated Canadians can now return to their country without having to go through quarantine, although they'll still get tested before coming home and on arrival. But we are looking at continuing our plan for gradual and safe reopening, hopefully with more announcements in the coming weeks about next and further steps. But every step of the way, we need to be careful because there's a situation of the level of vaccination in the country. We have to look at case levels in the country and outbreaks. We have to look at what variants of concern are present in Canada and indeed the situation around the world. Because every step of the way, we're going to be cautious and responsible in the way we move forward. We're all eager to get back to normal, but we're going to make sure we're doing it in a way that is safe for Canadians.
En suivi, donc, la frontière pourrait rouvrir pleinement dans quelques semaines. Si
fully reopen in a
je
few weeks. Am I understanding that correctly?
Si je me trompe.
Correct me if I'm wrong. And what would you say to people?
Excusez-moi,
No, go
j'avais
ahead.
une autre partie de
I
la
did have
question.
another part to my question. What do you say to people who've had
et qui ne peuvent
COVID-19
recevoir au Québec qu'une seule dose de vaccin
and can only receive one dose of the vaccine in Quebec at this point and that are furious because they won't be able to take advantage of these new measures in 2 weeks' time? Answer, we expect to have answers in the coming weeks as to the next steps. Of course, there are no guarantees. We will be following this closely. As far as I'm concerned, reopening, this gradual reopening is going to happen on a rate of a few weeks at a time, within a few weeks and not within a few months, as I've said. There are parts of the country, including Quebec and other parts of the world, that recognize that when someone has had COVID, one single dose of the vaccine could be sufficient. So we can tell you that scientists and experts are currently actively looking into this matter, and we will be looking at the data, we will be looking at the ways of assessing both having had a case of COVID and the level of vaccination after one dose. These are things that we have been looking at, but we weren't ready to make a final determination yesterday in yesterday's announcement. But of course, we are closely following science and recommendations from our experts.
There is an issue that some jurisdictions around the world, including Quebec, are talking about, that someone who has had COVID and only gets one dose of a vaccine could have a sufficient level of protection. As always, as a country, we make our decisions based on the best science, the best evidence, the best data available. And I know that our experts are leaning in on exactly that question to try and make a determination if indeed that's something we can be confident in as we move forward. So we will continue to work with jurisdictions that are doing that. We will continue to look at ways of getting life back to normal in a way that is safe and effective for everyone. But we were not ready to make that call yesterday for the announcement. So it's something we're going to look at carefully, and hopefully we'll have a better answer for people in the coming weeks as we look to making more announcements.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
The next question is from Marika Walsh from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I'm following up on a story from my colleagues earlier this week on your caucus spending nearly $200,000 in taxpayer-funded spending to the same companies, Data Sciences and NGP Band, that work for your re-election campaigns. Part of this is from is with your childhood friend Tom Pitfield, and I'm wondering if you can explain to Canadians why this taxpayer-funded spending is justified.
As you know, MPs do important work in responding to constituency concerns, and this database is used exclusively for dealing with constituency issues. And I can also assure you that all rules have been followed in both the contract and the way it's used.
And how does this fit with your open and accountable government policy, where you wrote that members of your government, quote, must uphold the highest standards of honesty and impartiality, and both the performance of your official duties and the arrangement of your private affairs should bear the closest public scrutiny? How does this bear public scrutiny when the same organizations are working for the Liberal Party as for taxpayer-funded offices?
MPs do really important work serving their constituents in a nonpartisan way. And the database they use to manage that is separate from any political databases. And every step of the way, we have followed all the rules in place that are designed to make sure that the functioning of Parliament is done in a way that is fair.
Merci. Opérateur, on va prendre une dernière question au téléphone.
One last question over the phone, operator.
Catherine
Lévesque from la Presse canadienne, Canadian Press.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Yes, Mr. Trudeau.
On est à quelques heures de la fin des travaux parlementaires.
We're a few hours away from the end of the parliamentary session.
Ou si vous étiez satisfait
I am
du
wondering
bilan
if you
législatif que vous
were
laissez aux Canadiens
happy with
à ce moment-ci.
the legislative record of your government at this point. Answer. I think we recognize that this has been a very challenging year for everyone, a year when Parliament has been able to deliver supports and services in an unprecedented way. We made a direct promise to Canadians at the beginning of this pandemic that we would be there to support them with everything needed, and so long as it was needed, and we've been able to deliver. Of course, there are a few measures that remain that we hope will be passed over the coming 2 days that will allow us to help continue to support Canadians, including measures in our budget, and I have high hopes that the other parties that are progressive, like the Liberal Party, will be there to make sure that we are always here to support Canadians. Indeed, there have been disagreements and, unfortunately, a great deal of obstruction, especially on the part of the Conservative Party. With respect to our being able to provide these supports to Canadians, but we've been able to provide a lot to Canadians.
Oui, je comprends ce que vous dites au sujet de cette volonté de passer ces projets de loi prioritaires.
I understand what you're saying about really wanting to get these bills passed through the House of Commons, but the Senate will also have to deal with these bills. Parliamentary work in the Senate should close off by Friday at the latest. I wonder if you're going to ask for the government representatives in the Senate to bring down time allocation on those important bills. As you know, the Senate is more independent, less partisan than it used to be. We certainly hope that the senators will be able to do their work in a rigorous way, but I also know that senators know full well that many Canadians are expecting us to go ahead to protect LGBTQ communities by putting a ban on these conversion therapies. Canadians are expecting us to go ahead to move forward with a bill to really make sure we are carbon neutral. We know, or I know that the senators believe it's important to get this bill passed because direct support to Canadians is at risk in the coming weeks if we do not manage to get C-30 passed. These are things we're continuing continuing to work on. In a positive way, it's important for democracy to work, for debates to take place. It's also important to deliver for Canadians, and I'm fully confident that the Senate understands this, and the Senate will do its work in a rigorous way and swiftly, in this case, hopefully.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Christian Noël
Good day,
de Radio
Prime
Canada.
Minister. Christian Noël from Radio Canada. You have many things on your agenda. You have a few days left. You're blaming the opposition, which I understand, but I'd like to address your government's responsibility in all of this. If you launch elections before the House resumes, this would mean there are many issues that remain incomplete. With respect to any elections, what happens? How does this figure? How does this? How do you deal with this? At the idea of coming back to sit in September? Answer. Again, I reiterate that it is possible for us to address these issues in the coming 2 days. The conversion therapy issue, the carbon neutral bill by 2050, achieving carbon neutral Canada by 2050, the ability to make sure that the Budget Implementation Act 2021, all of this could be passed in the coming 2 days, and we are counting on these progressive parties, the NDP and the Bloc, to make sure that these issues that they agree on, I mean, the Conservatives are against these issues, but these progressive parties are united in their views. We certainly hope that this will come to pass.
Prime Minister Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. In his report today, the military ombudsman described the handling of the sexual misconduct crisis by the government and top military brass as, quote, erratic behavior of leadership defies common sense or reason, end quote, and that, quote, the concept of ministerial accountability has been absent. Gregory Lick again called for independent civilian oversight of the forces to avoid political interference. That's far from the first time. I know you know this. The ombudsman went into his report and said his office has been calling for this for more than 20 years. So when will you commit to a timeline for this to happen?
We have, over the past number of years, starting in 2015, taken significant measures to counter sexual misconduct and unacceptable actions in our armed forces and indeed across the public service and in workplaces across Canada. We have seen, however, there is still much more to do, which is why we have taken concrete actions over this past year to make sure that anyone who comes forward with stories of misconduct or allegations of sexual assault are heard, are supported, and that there are consequences through a rigorous process. We also need to make sure we are changing the culture that has been pervasive for far too long within our armed forces of tolerance to misogyny, to unacceptable actions. That's why we did take action and are taking action, whether it's by moving forward with recommendations contained in Justice Fish's report, whether it's appointing Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan to lead the part of the armed forces that deals with these kinds of issues, and further, by ensuring that Madame Justice Louise Arbour is given the capacity to look at the entire situation and make very concrete recommendations on how we move forward. And I know she will be looking, as will I, very carefully at Mr. Lick's report to see how we can make sure that the Ombudsman's office is a key part of the solution as we move forward. We will be making significant changes to the way the military functions in the coming months as Madame Arbour begins to make recommendations concrete, and we will take those actions necessary. Ça fait bien des années que nous reconnaissons à quel point le Canada doit en faire plus pour protéger quiconque soient exposés à des situations de violence, d'intimidation, d'agression dans les forces armées ou ailleurs dans les lieux de travail au Canada. On a vu depuis les derniers mois à quel point les défis sont énormes dans nos forces armées.
There are major challenges within our armed forces, and this is why we need to do more, and we are currently doing more. We are implementing the recommendations from Justice Fish's report. We have the Lieutenant General Carignan heading
du centre pour appuyer les survivantes et victimes d'intimidation, d'agression à l'intérieur des forces armées. Et on a demandé à Mme la Justice Louise Arbour de faire un travail compréhensif pour vraiment mettre de l'avant les mesures
develop
que
a
nous
comprehensive
devons
plan
prendre
so
en
that
tant
we
que
can
pays
put forward
pour s'assurer
measures that we can take as a country in order to put a stop to this culture that tolerates misogyny, that tolerates
des actions inacceptables
reprehensible acts within our armed forces, and this has been going on for far too long. As I've said, we need to be there to support all those who choose to serve in our Canadian Armed Forces, choose to serve their country. We will do that. We will continue to act in a tangible, concrete way, and we will be paying close attention to Mr. Lick's recommendations to follow up.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Boris Proulx,
Prime Minister Boris Proulx from Le
J'aimerais
Devoir.
revenir sur cette question des
I'd like to get back to
Québécois
this
qui ont
issue
eu
of
la
Quebecers
COVID-19
who've
et qui
themselves
ont été
contracted
guéris, ont reçu une
COVID-19,
dose de vaccin,
recovered,
qui
received
ne
one
peuvent avoir de
dose
seconde dose,
of the
à qui on dit
vaccine
maintenant,
and
vous ne
cannot
pouvez,
get a second dose. And now they're being
vous avez
told,
besoin de faire la quarantaine
listen, you
obligatoire,
have
finalement.
to quarantine, basically,
Tout à l'heure, vous avez
when
dit
you
que
get
vos
back to the
scientifiques
country.
n'étaient pas prêts à
You
trancher
said that the
définitivement sur
scientists
cette
weren't
question.
prepared
Qu'est-ce
to
qu'on
make a
comprend
final
de ça? Est-ce
decision
que ça se
on
pourrait
this
que la
at
science sur
this
laquelle se
point.
base le gouvernement du Québec, par exemple, est
Is it
inexacte?
possible that the science that is being used in Quebec is inaccurate? And sir, what we're saying is that in our measures, the measures that were announced yesterday regarding reopening
attentionnée et graduelle de nos frontières et un enlèvement des restrictions.
The reopening of our borders, the lifting of measures.
De façon
we are
étape par
proceeding
étape.
step by
Je
step.
comprends qu'il y a
I
des
understand that there are
par rapport à
concerns
ceux
with
qui
respect to
ont eu la
people
COVID et ont
who
juste
did
une
contract
vaccination. Il y a des
COVID and
préoccupations par
have
rapport
only
aux
had
enfants, par
one
exemple, qui ne peuvent pas
vaccine
encore
dose,
être
or
vaccinés
concerns
et
about
qui vont
children who can't
devoir
yet
faire la
get
quarantaine,
a
même si leurs
vaccine and will
parents
have to
sont actuellement
be in quarantine
exempts
despite the fact
de
that
la
their children,
quarantaine parce
that their
qu'ils
parents
sont double
are
vaccinés.
exempted
Il y a
because
encore bien
they
des questions par rapport
are
à
doubly
des gens qui seraient
vaccinated
vaccinés
or
qui
fully
voudraient
vaccinated.
venir
There are
en
other
touriste au
questions with
Canada.
respect to people who are fully vaccinated and would like to come to Canada as tourists. There are further steps to come, but at each step in the process, we need to make sure that we continue to be cautious and protect Canadians, making sure that the health and safety of Canadians is always our top priority. So yes, we have come to that important first step yesterday. As of July 5th, fully vaccinated Canadians will not have to quarantine. There will be further announcements, but each step in the process, we will do things correctly and based on the best available science.
Tom Perry, CBC. Canada is before the UN Human Rights Council today, calling on China to open up to international observers to look at its treatment of Muslim Uyghurs. China has fired back, saying that Canada needs to be more transparent about its treatment of Indigenous people, specifically the findings in Kamloops recently. I'm wondering what you think about China's response. I'm also wondering whether you think there's any comparison between China's treatment of its Uyghurs and Canada's treatment of Indigenous people. And do you think that you in any way weakened Canada's position when you accepted the findings of the MMIWG report that said that Canada had committed genocide?
I think it's extremely important that all of us, as Canadians, but indeed as citizens around the world, pay attention to what's going on in China. The systemic abuse and human rights violations against the Muslim Uyghurs, the concerns about the situation in Hong Kong, in Tibet. These are things that matter not just to people living in China, but to people around the world. And we are very, very pleased to see not only our strongest allies in the G7 and in Europe align themselves with Canada's position, but a total of 44 countries from all different corners of the world highlighting that it is of all of our concern to be speaking out against human rights abuses everywhere around the world, and particularly in China in this situation. In Canada, we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Where is China's Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Where is their truth? Where is the openness that Canada has always shown and the responsibility that Canada has taken for the terrible mistakes of the past and indeed many of which continue into the present? We have over the past 6 years recognized that the relationship with Indigenous Canadians had been broken over generations and centuries and needed to be fixed. And that started with recognizing the truth and moving towards reconciliation, both things that are still very much works in progress. But thousands of kids over the past few years have started their school year in brand new schools because of the work that we've done as a country over the past years. 108 long-term boil water advisories have been lifted over the past 4 years after decades in which very little was done. Hundreds of thousands of requests under the Jordan's principle for kids to receive proper medical care across the country in Indigenous communities have been fulfilled after none of them being fulfilled before 2015. We have made progresses on protecting languages, on ensuring that kids don't get removed from their communities when they're at risk, that communities continue to promote language and culture in a way that over the past while has done a very good job of highlighting not what we've done, but how much more there is to do. And we know that in this country. The journey of reconciliation is a long one, but it is a journey we are on. China is not recognizing even that there is a problem. That is a pretty fundamental difference, and that is why Canadians and people from around the world are speaking up for people like the Uyghurs who find themselves voiceless faced with a government that will not recognize what's happening to them. Je pense que c'est important que tout le monde reconnaisse que nous avons un devoir en tant que citoyens partout dans le monde de reconnaître les violations des droits de la personne, les abus qui se passent ailleurs dans le monde et dans cette situation aussi pour les Ouïghours musulmans en Chine. C'est quelque chose d'important que le Canada est joint par 44 autres pays, bien sûr nos alliés du G7 et beaucoup de pays européens, mais aussi des pays de partout dans le monde, pour souligner notre préoccupation grave avec ce qui se passe en Chine par rapport aux droits de la personne. Je pense que cette réponse qu'offre la Chine que le Canada a des problèmes aussi, alors on ne devrait pas en parler, démontre l'incompréhension totale du gouvernement chinois à cet égard. Nous avons eu des excuses offertes par le gouvernement précédent à la Chambre des communes, une commission de vérité et de réconciliation pour justement démontrer la vérité qui doit être souligné, une vérité qu'on continue à en apprendre de plus en plus de façon tragique au fil des semaines, ces jours-ci.
Unfortunately, about tragic events in the last few weeks, and at the same time as we've heard these things, there has been so much suffering in the past, and that's still happening today. We are working as a government, as a country. Because of this, millions of children have been starting up in new schools over the last few years. Hundreds of thousands of children received support support
du principe de Jordan
through the Jordan's
qui leur offre
principle
des services médicaux.
that provides medical services.
Des communautés, 108 différentes communautés ont vu des avis d'ébullition d'eau levés.
Have had these boil advisories lifted. These are boil advisories that had been in place for years, sometimes decades.
Nous avons fait du progrès sur la protection des langues autochtones, sur l'investissement dans la culture autochtone, sur la défense des jeunes à risque pour permettre que ces jeunes soient gardés dans leur communauté, dans leur langue, au lieu d'enlever de leur culture, avec la loi 92. Nous sommes en train de faire le travail en partenariat avec les communautés autochtones et je reconnais qu'à chaque fois qu'on prend un pas en avant, ça ne fait que démontrer encore plus combien il reste encore à faire. Mais on a pris des actions concrètes et le fait que la Chine essaye même de comparer leur situation quand ils ne font rien, ils n'avouent rien.
When they do nothing
et vraiment la raison pour
they
laquelle
admit nothing,
nous devons, en tant que
personnes
à travers le monde,
as
lever nos
citizens
voix
throughout the world
pour défendre
need to
ceux
speak up
qui n'ont
to
pas de voix
defend
face
those who
au
have no
gouvernement
voice
chinois.
with dealing with the Chinese administration.
It's hard not to observe that all your ministers are putting out remarkably similar messaging on social media, painting a picture of Parliament as dysfunctional. Is this a message that you asked them to deliver, and is this your justification for moving toward an election in the fall?
It was hard not to watch the public servant who is at the head of the agency that has been keeping Canadians safe, doing unbelievably difficult work over the past many, many months, year and a half, called to the bar of the House of Commons for purely partisan political purposes. We have seen a level of obstructionism and toxicity in the House that is of real concern. There's always a back and forth in Parliament. There's always got to be debate and holding people to account, and we welcome that and continue to. But there's also a time to work together. And that's certainly what we hope we're going to be seeing from the other progressive parties, the NDP and the Bloc, as we move forward on passing some really important pieces of legislation today and tomorrow that will make a difference in the lives of Canadians. Supporting the LGBTQ community by banning conversion therapy. The Conservatives don't want it, don't want us to do that, but we will, with the support of the NDP and the Bloc. Moving towards net zero, enshrined in law for 2050. Again, the Conservatives will be voting against that, want to try and block it. But we will move forward on that if the NDP and the Bloc continue to understand, as they should as progressive parties, that we need to take action to protect the planet. And finally, moving forward on the Budget Implementation Act, which will ensure that supports don't run out in a few weeks for vulnerable workers, but will continue over the coming months as we reopen the economy. That really matters to workers, to families, to people across this country. And that's why we are very hopeful to be able to get that through with the support of the other progressive parties, even though, again, the Conservatives are trying to block it. So we recognize that Parliament is able to get big things done, despite the obstructionism that is going on these days, and we are very hopeful to be able to continue to support Canadians into the coming days and weeks and months.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning, Prime Minister. I know it's a big day for you, day 8 of that quarantine. Getting a test on this one halfway through. Good luck with that. I want to come back to borders too, and to see if I can just get you to listen a little closer to this question, because it's a question really stemming from the experts that you appointed, your government, on travel and screening. This is Dr. Bogosh, Dr. Dalla, Dr. Naylor, a dozen eminent scientists. They too want a cautious opening. They too want to protect the health and safety of Canadians above all. And when they reviewed the evidence, they grouped travelers into groups according to vaccination status, not according to nationality. Because their idea was a fully vaccinated American who follows all our protocols is as low a public health risk as a fully vaccinated Canadian. In other words, fully vaccinated Americans, tourists, ought to be able to come to Canada safely, just as a fully vaccinated Canadian can come back into the country safely. That, again, is Dr. Dallin, Dr. Naylor, Dr. Bogosh's conclusion. And yet you have said several times in your ministers, oh, we've got science to say that we should take a different approach. So please point to the science that says a fully vaccinated American is a greater public health risk than a fully vaccinated Canadian. Thanks. Good luck with the test.
Thank you, David. I actually took the test, the day 8 test this morning, and I'm continuing to quarantine, of course, until next week when my 14 days will be up. It's a really good question because people are wondering, because if being fully vaccinated protects you very effectively from the negative impacts of COVID-19, from most risks of hospitalization, then we should be very comfortable about that, and we are. But the issue is that being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 protects you from the worst impacts. It does not necessarily protect you from transmitting COVID-19, even though you're fully vaccinated, to someone who is partially or not vaccinated. So yes, full vaccination, great for protection. But if you're returning to a community that is only partially or low levels of vaccinations, that is a risk to public health. That's why our decision to reopen step by step and gradually is the right and responsible one. As of July 5th, those who have a right to enter into Canada now, returning permanent residents or citizens or people with exceptions, will be able to skip the quarantine if they're fully vaccinated. And that actually will allow for us to reopen partially for the people who need it, who are Canadians, but will not yet get to the volumes that would be involved in reopening too quickly to foreign travelers, even if they're fully vaccinated. We hope to get there soon, and we will be able to get there even sooner if Canadians continue to be so enthusiastic about getting those 2 doses that they need. We're already up above 20% in terms of full vaccinations. In the coming weeks, we expect that to continue to rise rapidly, and that will allow us to get to a place where we can accept larger volumes of people coming into this country. But grounding everything we do in a need to keep Canadians safe and to not get into a situation where, because we were a week or two too rushed, we'd have to close down again. Nobody wants to see new restrictions brought in the summer because the volumes were too high, because we were a little too rushed. So every step of the way, we're going to be careful and gradual about things, because we know we want to get there as quickly as possible, but we know it's more important to get there as quickly as is safe and responsible, and that is what all the best advice of our scientists and experts, and indeed looking at the capacity of our economy and our airports and our borders to ramp up the volumes that will be coming through. That's the right path for Canada to continue to be cautious.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.